Okay, we are live. It's always exciting and surprising when I see that it goes live. With me is someone I've known for a very long time, a friend, Matt Bennett, who is the co-founder of Third Way, a center-left think tank. If you would like, Third Way is on Substack. You can follow them at Third, the word, not the numbers, THIRD Way. Matt is joining me as part of a series I've been doing for a couple months now. We've talked to Rahm Emanuel, we've talked to John Anzalone, we've talked to Faz Shakur, trying to talk to Democrats all over the spectrum about what happened in 2024, where is the party now, and where does the party need to go? And I just think it's a really important conversation to have because if anything that I've learned in the last couple of weeks is the DNC appears to be in total chaos. So it's gonna be up to some of these folks like Matt and other folks to sort of figure out what's next. So that's the conversation. All right. So Matt, I always say this. I want to go back to understand where you've been before we can understand where we are and where we're going. So give me your, and I know we could spend an hour just on this, but give me your diagnosis when you look at 2024. Why did Kamala Harris lose, Democrats not retake the House, Democrats lose the Senate, Democrats, have a minority of governorships in the country, they have a minority of state legislatures in the country? What happened in that election as best as you could diagnose it?
Well, look, I think there's probably 6 or 7 things that happened to Harris and consequently to down ballot Democrats that may have been fatal all on their own. The 2 big ones, of course, were that inflation and migration or immigration are just incumbent killers. They were killing incumbents all over the industrial world last year and the years prior. And, that might have elected Trump all by itself. Yeah. Then, of course, there was the chaos around Biden and his age and the lying and cover-up around his age and all of that. The way that Harris entered the race with very little time and all the things that preceded it, that might have been fatal. But I think the most important, those things were, in the past. The most important takeaway is the stuff that continues, and that is how the party is perceived. After the election, you may recall Jen O'Malley Dillon, who was the chair of the Harris campaign, said, "We lost because voters thought that Harris was dangerously liberal." And, you just glance at that map that you've referenced many times. It was in the New York Times with all the rightward pointing red arrows.
Yeah, I mean, basically everywhere in the country moved in comparison to 2020. Every state moved more in Donald Trump's direction. Doesn't mean he won every state, obviously, but in New Jersey, he had lost by 14 and he lost by 6. In Illinois, he had lost by 18, he lost by 10. To your point, I mean, red states got redder, blue states got redder.
Yeah, and in some places they got redder in terrifying ways, like Starr County, Texas, which is all Latino, which Obama won like 80-20 or something in 2012, and then Trump won. So really scary demographic shift all over the place. We didn't get killed with white women. Black women are the rock of the Democratic Party, but like everywhere else, we were just getting slaughtered. So our view is that Democrats were seen as both kind of out of touch with the way people's lives were going economically and as weirdos on matters of culture. And they just didn't like what they saw from us.
It's funny you use that word because I still maintain, and I will until my dying breath, that on the back of one cable TV interview in which he referenced Donald Trump and J.D. Vance as weird, Tim Walz wound up being the vice presidential nominee. And yet you're right. I mean, when I talk, we for people who have seen a couple of these, when I talked to, I think it was Anzalone, who, for people who don't know, polled for Biden, was intimately involved in the polling operation for Obama as well. He said, look, I sit in these focus groups. This is post-election. And he said, people say that we're weak and woke. Yeah. And it's, it's weird is another W that I think on cultural stuff comes up. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you, Matt. It's just funny how that word went from being what Democrats thought they had found the silver bullet to beat the Republican Party, Trump, Vance, etc., and it wound up kind of redounding against them in your mind.
Totally. And like mea culpa, I loved it when Tim Walz said the weird thing. And to me, Trump is profoundly weird. And so is MAGA, but I'm a partisan. And as
Yeah.
it turns out, as Anzo made clear when he talked to you, yeah, the weak and woke thing is the real problem. Uh, and woke is a term that's gets tossed around in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, but
Yeah.
I think fundamentally it means that the party had just gone too far to the left for comfort for a whole bunch of voters. And not I'm not talking about MAGA diehards. I'm talking about
Hmm.
the swing voters that we desperately need, that we lost in all the places we just discussed. So
Yep.
that's, I think, the big takeaway for us going forward.
I to your to your point, I was thinking of this yesterday. I didn't write about it, but I thought it was fascinating. Sarah McBride, who was the first trans member of Congress um, from Delaware, said in an interview, "We the Democratic Party skipped to trans 201. We never did trans 101 for the public," which I think is another way. I just think that's an interesting way to think about it. Like, it's I don't think any. I shouldn't say that. I think there are plenty of people who would have voted for Democrats if they had simply said, look, trans people exist. We want them to feel safe. We want them to feel included. Uh, it's complicated. We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about it or thinking about it right now. It's a complicated issue. Even though I always say Kamala Harris didn't talk about trans stuff during this 2024 campaign much, that was the assumption that it's like, well, they're all about woke cultural issues, and you
Well,
guys couldn't get away from that branding.
totally. I mean, look, another thing that happened to Harris is that she walked into some of this in 2019 when
Totally
she kind of entered the race and then suddenly became, look, she entered the race with a fantastic tagline. It was Kamala Harris for the
for the
people,
people.
right?
Great
For the
line.
people. This is a badass prosecutor, which is what she was. And then suddenly she became Kamala Harris or God knows what. But, she gave the
Well,
interview with the
liberal
SCLU.
warrior.
Yeah.
She
Super liberal
clearly
boy.
thought, right? Like, this is what's hard. I understand why she did it. She clearly thought, okay, the path here is to be a more electable Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is not
Right.
going to win, but the base of the party is with, remember, this is 2019. The base of
Yeah.
the party is with Bernie Sanders. They're not going to choose a modern establishment like old white guy like Joe Biden. So I just need to be Sanders-esque, but don't look like, I always say, like the crazy physics professor from college, right? Like, I'm gonna
Totally.
occupy an electable space here. And that's why she took those positions. I'm not convinced she ever really believed it. It was just that was the theory of the case then. And then, of course, comes back to bite her in the ass.
And she made the fundamental error in our politics, in democratic politics, which is confusing activists with the base. The numeric base of the party is moderate. That's why we keep nominating people like Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, you know, John Kerry,
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. Uh,
Can you explain that, Matt?
yeah,
Explain that for me. Tell me how you think of activist and how you think of the base and why that's different.
right. So the activist core, the people that are most online, the people that show up at the oligarchy tour rallies, the
Uh
people
huh.
that organize and get out for the No Kings protest.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are enormously important to Democrats. I am not denigrating our activist base, they're great, but they are a minority in our party. The majority of our party are the people that might show up at one of those things if they're super pissed. And a lot of them did, I think, last week, but last weekend. But for the most part, these are people a little bit less engaged in politics and a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot more moderate. And I think what Harris failed to recognize in 2019, and what a whole bunch of, I think, commentators failed to see, we were never going to nominate Bernie Sanders. That is not how Democratic primary voters think. They vote in primaries like pundits. They're like, who is the most electable
Right.
going with our
Head
person?
versus heart. Yeah.
Totally. Like, I once watched a focus group in Iowa years ago where one of the participants said, well, I think the average voter would think this way. And I was like, dude, you're in a focus group in Iowa.
Right. You're
Like,
the average voter.
yes.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah. Go
that's what
ahead.
she mixed up. She mixed up those two things. And when you think about a base, it's the base of what is a pyramid, right? And that means numerically it has to be bigger. And uh, that is not the super engaged activist left. That is the moderate core of our party.
All right. So let's talk about where we are. Okay. So Well, let me ask you this. Let me do something quick first on the news. What do you make? I mean, you've been around Democratic politics for a long time. What do you
Yeah.
make of the current situation at the DNC? I mean, my view is like, I don't, I've read this story a lot of times and reported on this, not this story, but the same kind of story. It usually ends badly for the Ken Martin figure, the DNC chair figure. Like, what's your, I mean, it feels like this is just a massive wasted opportunity these last 5 months.
God, I mean, we had Trump is just like running roughshod over everything we care about. How is it possible
Yeah,
that we're talking about the DNC chairs problems
I
while
know.
Trump is like flailing around? So, yeah, disaster. I mean, I don't know Ken Martin, never met him, seems like a nice guy, but we endorsed Ben Wickler because we
Okay.
were kind of confident that Ben had proven in a swing state,
Yeah.
which he is
And for
in.
people who don't know, Ben Wickler is the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. Ken Martin, prior to being the DNC chair, was the chair of the Minnesota Democratic Party. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right, Minnesota, a state the Republicans had not won in the presidential since 1972. So,
Yeah.
like, not exactly a state that's in play. And anyway, who knows whether Ben would have done a better job. But then we had this massive distraction when David Hogg came in as a party leader, and I said at the time, "Look, I am worried that he does not know the difference between being an activist and being a party leader." That pretty much
Well, you
proved to
got
be the
that one right.
case. Yeah,
Is
and
that Matt? Is that to your activist versus base point that David Hogg is an activist, but not really representative of the Democratic base?
yeah, that's an excellent way of thinking about it because
Okay.
what Fogg came in to do and is immediately he said, well, I'm going to focus on raising $20 million to run against incumbent Democrats, which you cannot do as a party leader.
No.
You definitely can do as an activist.
Yep.
Like you can go out and do that all you want, but running people against incumbents is not what the DNC is there to do. They're there to beat Republicans. That is their
Yep.
only job. And he just didn't see that. And I think that was the problem. But Martin allowed that to become an enormous distraction.
Oh,
Then he picked a fight with like big union bosses. And so
I mean, I
anyway,
I
so
always say like when's the last time even people like us who follow this really closely, if you said to me, Chris, I'll give you $100 million if you can name five prior DNC vice chairs, I'd be like David Hogg and that's it. I mean, my point is like the fact that this is, I mean, nobody knows who the hell these people are, nor should they if you are trying to rebuild a party. And
right,
yet this has become a national news story. I mean, it's
right.
just such a cluster.
Ridiculous. And right. Look, I've been a professional Democrat for 40 years and I couldn't name another vice chair of the party.
Just,
So the I think all of that is to say it's a mess. I don't know how it'll get sorted out. You may be right that like these are the kinds of stories that lead to change.
yeah.
But in the end, I'm not sure it matters all that
I
much.
don't think I don't think it
They'll get it
does.
together. Yeah.
I don't think it does. I mean, I think it's not great where they are in a fundraising perspective. Place is not great, but like there will be money to oppose
Oh yeah.
Donald Trump backed Republicans. All right, so I ask a lot of people this question, which is because there's differing answers on this. So if you talk to, I did one of these with Simon Rosenberg, and his view was, I said, what's the problem with the party brand? And he said, there's not really a party problem with the party brand. We lost narrowly. If a few votes go this way or that way, we would have won. And me and everybody else talking about this is overblowing it. Now, the pushback I make on that is, so let me ask you that first. Does the Democratic Party have a brand problem that will haunt it, whether in 2026 or 2020, if not addressed in your mind?
Yes, a massive problem. Look, Simon's very smart. I've known him a long time, but his whole thing is hopium. We were going to
Right,
win big,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I get that he's kind of invested in the proposition that, we didn't
It
win
was
big, we lost
close.
narrowly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just think that's wrong. I mean, our approval rating as a party is 27%.
I always say it's the lowest approval rating the Democratic Party has had in like 50 or 60 years.
Yeah, and by the way, it isn't just the kind of brand of the party that's bad nationally. Look at what's happening in very blue places. San Francisco threw out their mayor and their DA. The Chicago mayor's approval rating is 14%, which I didn't even know was possible
I
to have a
know.
rating of 14%. And
Congratulations, I
yeah,
guess. Yes.
exactly. And people are fleeing blue states and cities because the governance isn't good. So we have a problem that isn't just about kind of being weak and woke in perception. We have a problem that the reality in very blue places has been very disappointing for a lot of folks. So we need to change a lot of things. Certainly, we need to change the brand. We need to change the kind of fundamental narrative about what we're offering voters, and we got to change how we govern.
So let's talk about that then. So if we can agree that there is a brand problem, and I always say, like, we could debate the depth of it, but it seems to me when you have particularly when Donald Trump is the alternative, when you're in 28, 29% approval for the Democratic Party, that's not great. Um, what should, and you've been around campaigns a long time, what should, in a sentence, the Democratic brand be to your mind?
We
Like, if
should
I say Democrats, what's your ideal winning response?
They are the party that is reasonable and rational and focused every single day on making lives better for people in the working and middle classes.
Hmm.
And look, my I came of age really on the Clinton campaigns and in the Clinton White House. And Bill Clinton's formulation at its base was if you work hard and play by the rules, you should get a fair shake.
Hmm.
That still works pretty well. I'm not saying people should say that exactly because, things are different. And obviously all the policy stuff that he was running on 30 years ago is irrelevant now.
Right.
We can't take putting people first books and put it into people's mailboxes and run on that.
Bill Clinton didn't foresee AI, for example, as
Yeah,
a
right.
workforce disruptor. Had
No,
he would have probably made even more money than he's made. But yes.
right, and China wasn't even making socks back
Right.
then. So,
Right.
like, the world is completely different. And look, we made some mistakes. There's no question, which we need to own as kind of Clinton Democrats. But fundamentally, his insight and Obama's also about how to win elections and how to build broad coalitions remains correct. And that's what we need to get back to. And I think we got away from it. And that started especially in Trump won because not surprisingly, that radicalized our party.
Hmm.
Remember, like it started off with the Muslim ban and all this and Charlottesville and all
Yep.
these terrible things.
Yep.
And that radicalized people. And we were further radicalized by the horrific murder on television of George Floyd. And all of that kind of culminated in the culture changing in ways that were very uncomfortable. To Sarah McBride's point, we went to the 200 level, not just on
Yeah.
trans issues, but a whole bunch of things
Yeah.
too quickly.
Um, you mentioned this, and the one of these I did right before you last week was with Faz Shakir, who is Bernie Sanders' sort of lead campaign advisor, and his point was, look, uh, it's 2025, we're out of power everywhere, and yet, uh, you know, sure, 30,000 people came to Los Angeles to see this fighting oligarchy rally, but he's like, we were in Nampa, Idaho, and there were 14,000 people. So you reference the fighting oligarchy stuff as that's the activist part of the party. So what do you make of that? Because I mean, my view is like crowd size. I mean, my gosh, with Trump, but like crowd size can be, it's like yard signs. You'd rather a bigger crowd size than smaller. You'd rather have more yard signs than less, but I'm not sure it's hugely predictive. Um, but what do you make of that? Because clearly, I would say there doesn't, to the extent there is energy in the Democratic Party right now, that appears to me where it is. What do you say to that? Sort of like the whole like the future is AOC notion of the party, which I would assume you don't agree with, knowing you, but
No, I definitely do not agree with that. Look, I think it is always the case that it's easy to overstate activism and mistake that for broad support, even in Democratic primaries. Let's leaving aside who would do better in a general election, and
mhm.
I would be happy to debate Faz on that point. But let's just talk about who's likely to win the Democratic nomination in 2028. I am old enough to remember, in fact, I was old even then, when Howard Dean's crowd sizes were supposed to be determinative of what was going to happen in 2004.
Yep.
We've seen this movie many times before, and it happened with Bernie in 2016. It happened with Bernie in 2020, and 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 it just isn't accurate. Like, sure, they can put a lot of people in stadiums, a lot of people wearing their university sweatshirts. These are educated people who are going to vote for Democrats, and they're very engaged and very online, and they watch your stuff and they read everything.
Yeah.
And these are people that are engaged with us. But if you look at politics through that lens, or through the lens of X or Twitter or Blue Sky or any of these things, you are looking through a funhouse mirror. That is not where Democrats are. And it was absolutely clear once we got to South Carolina in 2020 that, you know, no, we weren't going to go with the Democratic Socialist who was leading in the polls. We were changing gears, and by the time we got to Super Tuesday, 3 days later, uh, Joe Biden crushed Bernie Sanders, and that kind of thing is going to happen again.
What do you, and it's impossible to prove a hypothetical, but what do you make of, because I think a lot of the argument I hear on the left is, well, uh, Bernie might have beaten Donald Trump in 2016. You know, pick a liberal. I don't know who it is, but pick a liberal. It wouldn't have happened because of the way Biden got out, and it was always going to be Harris. But pick a liberal. That liberal could have beaten Trump in 2024. What do you make of that? It's like, well, if only you Democrats would give us our chance, we would show you. That's sort of the, like, Hillary lost. Not that Kamala Harris ran as a moderate, she didn't, but the establishment keeps picking these people who lose. And, like, what do you say to that? And I'm not trying to put you in the role of defending the establishment, because I don't think that's how you see yourself, but just say these people who are seen as more electable, which tends to mean in the Democratic Party more moderate on issues.
Sure, that is definitely the argument they make, and it's not an insane argument. We have lost more races than we should have, including twice to a horrible human being and the worst president in American history. So I get it. I get the criticism. But I will say, if you look at real races, um, since 2016, candidates endorsed by Bernie's group, Our Revolution, or by the Justice Democrats, which are more
Mm-hmm.
aligned with AOC,
Mm-hmm.
they've flipped from Republican to Democrat. They have flipped a total of 0 House seats. 0. Not one. Meanwhile, the House Democrats won 33 seats in 2018 and handed the gavel to Nancy Pelosi. They are the majority makers. They win in these races. And where Democrats act in ways other than what I've described, where they nominate somebody farther to the left in a swing district, those people tend to lose. That happened actually in 2018 in 2 places. In Nebraska, one where that kind of weird district of
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska, and in my hometown of Syracuse, New York, where there is now a moderate Democrat. John Mannion sits in that
Yep.
seat now, but we nominated a kind of more liberal activist in 2018, a very good year for Democrats. And in those 2 places, they lost. So in the real world, in general elections, their theory falls apart. Moreover, if you look at kind of polling about Bernie and AOC, both of whom have national profiles, people know who
Mm-hmm.
they are and they
Yep.
know what they stand for, they're pretty unpopular. And most fundamentally, Chris, and this I think is the most important thing, we are in an age of right-wing populism here and all over the world. Obviously, Donald Trump is a right-wing populist. Sometimes he governs as a kind of weirdo populist, but fundamentally, that's what MAGA is. The question before Democrats and the question before small d Democrats who are trying to save democracy everywhere is, how do you battle right-wing populism most
Mm-hmm.
effectively?
Mm-hmm.
And what we have seen both here and around the world is the most effective way to battle right-wing populism is not by offering voters left-wing populism. That is somebody ordering a Coke and delivering them a Diet Coke. That is not what they
Mm-hmm.
ordered. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that they it just isn't the same. The right-wing populists pick villains and they punch down. Their villains are mostly immigrants and people of color. The left-wing populists punch up at billionaires. I mean, Bernie, it used to be millionaires. He has upgraded over
That's right.
with inflation. Now it's
Yep.
billionaires. But the problem is those are not equivalent villain groups, and they're not as resonant, and it's just not going to work. The way that democracies have battled right wing populism successfully, like in Poland and elsewhere, is when center left groups come together and fight back, and we believe that's the only way to do it here.
So let's talk about 2026 is its own animal. It's a midterm. I would assume Democrats will do pretty well, whether or not they
Yeah.
fix their brand problems, because these elections tend to function as a referendum on the incumbent. My guess is Trump will be under 45%. Democrats only need 3 seats to take the House back, etc. Let's focus on 2028 because that will be more of a, okay, what are Democrats? What
Yeah.
do you stand for? What does the brand stand for? Are there people out there right now that my guess is if you did a poll today, Harris would probably be ahead, just name ID. And AOC would probably be in, if Sanders wasn't included, AOC would probably be in second. And then, maybe Buttigieg would be in there. But none of them strike me. And Buttigieg maybe, I don't know, you tell me, but like who's the when you look at all these people milling around, who do you say, like, okay, like message wise, that seems right to me?
I think there's a whole bunch of them. I don't know if they're all going to, or if any of them are going to run for
Yeah.
president, but I think there's several. So certainly Josh Shapiro,
Okay.
Andy Bashir,
Yep.
Gretchen Whitmer, um, all of those governors are governing from the center left in, I think, ways that are really compelling, and they have stories to tell. So, and you've reported on this, that, the first thing Shapiro did when he came into office was
Yep.
said, we're getting rid of the requirement for a college degree, which is so smart. The
Yep.
college degree thing was one of our mistakes that
Yep.
Clinton Democrats made. Pushing everybody to go to college was stupid, and we need to get away from that. He also showed that we can cut through red tape. We do not have to accept kind of status quo ideas about what government can and can't do. He did it most obviously with 95. And by the way, I
Yeah.
would put Governor Moore in this
Yeah.
category too,
Yep.
because he did the same thing with the bridge
Yep.
over the bay,
Yep.
over the harbor.
Yep.
And basically what those guys said, and Gretchen Whitmer ran her signs when she ran the first time were fix the damn roads. And then she did. She went out and fixed a whole bunch of roads.
Mm-hmm.
And what they said to their bureaucracies was, I don't care if it normally would take 3, 6, 9 months to do this. You're going to do it in 3 weeks. And I want to see you tomorrow morning, and you're going to tell me how you're going to get that done. And
Which weirdly, Matt, I mean,
yeah,
like, and I want to talk about Trump at the end, but which weirdly I think is part of Trump's appeal too,
totally.
is the kind of like, I don't give a shit if it normally takes 6 months. You're gonna do it. Like,
Right.
even if it doesn't necessarily get done, it's the like, well, we're not going to accept the status quo thing vibe that works.
Exactly. That part, that is the one piece of Trumpism I think we should adopt. Now, obviously, he has done it in ways that are insane. Like, we're not going to accept that. Well, we've always done it that we would, do research into cancer
Right.
through peer-reviewed journals, and we're not going to do that. Like
Right.
that kind of thing
Right.
is crazy. But the
The
but the red
sentiment as opposed to the specifics. Yeah.
exactly. But cutting through red tape where people need you to do it, where service has to be provided, both in the kind of emergency sense, like repairing 95, but
Mm-hmm.
also in the day to day sense, like housing takes too long and is too expensive to build. And some of that is because there's way too much regulation, especially in blue places. And I think our candidate's going to come in and say, that's ridiculous. We have got to be able to build housing, build clean energy projects, build transmission lines, build high-speed rail, build the things you need. All of this is like a part of the abundance agenda that Ezra and Derek talk about in
Yep.
their book, and a whole bunch
Yep.
of other groups are focused on. I think though the focus of those groups, and I think they would agree, the focus of the book at least is kind of narrow. It's housing and energy and
Mm-hmm.
transport, but you could extend that idea, cut through the bureaucracy, set aside all the bullshit that has built up in the last 50 years of good faith progressive efforts to like keep us safe, and give people the things that they need. That I think will be a compelling message for a Democrat to carry.
And I'll just note, and you tell me if I'm finding a pattern where there isn't any. Shapiro, Bashir, Whitmer, Moore, those are 4 governors.
Yeah, Oh, that's correct. You are finding a pattern. And look, I mean, that is not to say, and like Gina Raimondo, former
Hmm.
governor,
Former governor.
could run.
Yep.
I do think, look, there's a reason very few people have been elected from the U.S. Senate, and basically no one from the U.S. House has been elected president. It's because you got to run against Washington, no matter what. I mean, Bill Clinton ran against Washington when Washington was running pretty well, actually.
Hmm.
I remember, like in '92, our campaign was bashing George H.W. Bush. Like he was doing a pretty good job, and his approval rating was 90% at one point.
Hmm.
So now we're going to run against the exact opposite of that in terms of Republican presidents. And we're going to have to be able to swing away hard, not only at Trump, but at the way things work here. And I think if you look at the people, even the people in Washington that are doing that successfully, Alyssa Slotkin, Ruben Gallego, people like that, Richie Torres,
Hmm.
they are saying Democrats cannot defend the status quo. We cannot be the party of the establishment. We cannot protect all the stuff that we've built over the years. We've got to change. And one of the fundamental insights in the book that Ezra and Derek wrote was Democrats built all those things to stop stuff from getting built because fundamentally, for a long time, the stuff getting built, progressives regarded as bad. It was like coal plants and
Hmm.
highways and
Yep.
chemical plants.
Yep.
And so all of those things were designed to protect the environment and to protect people, all in very good faith. And then a whole bunch of other things were layered on top. You got to hire local, you got to hire minority owners, you got to hire LGBTQ people, all of it in good faith, but all of it really now hurting the people and the things that we care about most, and we have to be willing to throw that out. Not all of it.
Uh, I
But
wanna end on, and I'm always resistant to making it's hard in modern this era of politics to not literally make everything, every conversation, every piece I write, everything I talk about Trump. But um, how do you mentioned it? In 2020, let's just assume that he is not on the ballot again. I don't know how he could be, but for the
right.
purposes, let's assume he's not on the ballot. It's my contention, and I want you to either agree or disagree with me, and then we'll talk about going forward. In 2016, by the end of the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton ran on a bunch of things, but by the end of the 2016 campaign, it felt to me a lot like the message was, I mean, you're not going to vote for this guy.
Totally.
And then
Yeah.
Harris ran on a lot of different things, right? Hope and optimism and, a brighter future. And then by the end, it was, I mean, it's me or Donald
Really?
Trump.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
so I feel like that makes me think, I do think the party is thought of too much as just like, okay, we're just not Trump. And that strikes me that that's not good. That will not win them a national majority or a majority of electoral votes. But how do you think of Trump and Trumpism maybe more broadly to the extent that's a thing in the 2028 conversation? Because inevitably, every race, right, uh, is defined in some way by the races that have come before it and by the president who is, we think, leaving. Like, how should Democrats both between 2025 and let's say mid 2027, how should they talk about Donald Trump? How much should they talk about Donald Trump? How little should they talk about him? And then I'm going to let you go.
So I think you were right earlier in that the midterms are going to be a referendum on Trump, but they got to talk a lot about Trump going into that. That's
Okay.
just what you do for the midterms,
Yes. True.
because voters are smart enough to know that, like, even if they make Democrats the majority, like, they're not going to be able to do anything. Trump's going to still be president. They're probably going to have the Senate. So we got to make it about Trump, and we got to prosecute the case against Trump carefully and deliberately, and we got to focus on the things that really matter to voters and leave aside things we may care about, but voters don't.
And tell
Um,
me what those are quickly, Matt.
Sure. So things voters care about. The tariffs, which are raising prices and making goods
Hmm.
harder to get and making their lives more expensive. Cutting things that nobody voted to cut, like cancer research and helping veterans and the guy that cleans the toilets in the national parks. Nobody wanted those things cut. And that kind of the Doge vandalism of government in these arbitrary and crazy ways, I think they really don't like, and you can focus on those things. The things that I really care about, but most voters don't: foreign aid, democracy, the rule of law. Those
They don't.
things,
I know it.
they
I know
just
it.
don't.
I
I
talked
mean,
to Democratic consultant after Democratic consultant. None of this was pre-Biden dropping out, but they were like, he's going to lose because he's 100% convinced that this election in 2024 is about democracy. And again, just to be clear, don't light Matt and I up in the comments. We are not. I think January 6th should have been disqualifying for Donald Trump,
totally.
but
Yeah.
that is not what the people who decide elections think. They were like, he's going to keep hammering on this, and it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, because he misinterpreted his win from 20. He thought he ran on like restoring the soul of America. This was prior to January 6th, obviously, and he won because Trump screwed up COVID. But
COVID.
in
Yeah.
any event, so I think
Okay. So
there,
between now and 2026, a heavy dose of uh, Trump's economic plans don't work. Uh, Doge got rid of. You didn't vote for all these Doge sorts of things. Less on democracy, less on those sorts of things. But
yeah.
but but very Trump focused. Okay, so then let's talk about 2026 midterm ends. It's January 2027. How do Pete Buttigieg or Shapiro, and you're not saying any of these people are running. I'm suggesting they are likely
No.
to run. Bashir. How do you think they effectively talk about Trump? Do they largely ignore him and say we're focused on doing what we do? Can you do that? Should you do that strategically? What do you think?
Well, for one thing, we're only 10% into the nightmare of Trump too. So God knows what the world will look like or what he will have screwed up, and there may be a thing you got to talk about.
Right,
But
right. We
um,
didn't see COVID at this point in the first term. Right.
exactly. But another thing Bill Clinton taught me: all elections are about the future, not the past. All of them. And fundamentally, we have got to offer a vision of the future that has two major elements. One, that voters that we lost, that is to say, non-college voters of all races, can see themselves in, that don't seem like a bunch of bullshit giveaways that they don't believe will help them or they think are bad, um, and that offer some degree of hopefulness for them. The reason they supported Trump last time, in addition to the culture stuff that we talked about, was they looked back with rose-colored glasses at
Yeah.
the economy of his first term, and
Yeah.
they thought, "I want that back."
Yep.
And so he didn't offer a vision of the future. I mean, his vision of the future was tariffs and deportations, both of which are inflationary. So if they thought it through, like Harris's plan obviously was better, but she didn't offer any kind of coherent vision about what the world would look like. And if we have a candidate that can say the modern equivalent of, if you work hard and play by the rules, you get a fair shake, that you will have the opportunity to earn. This is all about earning, not giveaways. You will have the opportunity to earn a good life where you live. And a good life means you'll be able to afford a home, educate your kids, retire with dignity, have health care. If you can do those things, you have a good life. And the details will matter, especially to people like me and you. And
Yeah, but the
there'll be
average
lots of,
person's not engaged in that.
yeah, policy doesn't win elections.
No, it's all
You,
vibes. I mean, it really
yeah,
is. I mean, that's
yeah, you campaign in
Trump.
poetry and govern in
Totally.
prose. Yeah.
People would always say to me, like, I still remember. It's so funny. I remember this is now a decade ago, but people when it got down to Trump versus Ted Cruz in the Republican primary in 2016, people would say to me, not political people, but people did, who's more conservative? Do you think Cruz or Trump? And I was like, well, whether you like or hate Ted Cruz, he's actually like pretty traditionally conservative. Donald Trump isn't conservative at all. I
No,
mean,
right.
Hillary Clinton may be more conservative than Donald Trump. So like it's amazing but it's the tonal stuff, right? It's all vibes.
Yeah.
It's he's tough and he'll swear and he'll say you got to treat these protesters more roughly. Like it's all he goes to UFC fights. It's all that. It's not very few swing voters are like, let me go to Donald Trump's issues webpage and see what he actually believes. They just don't do it. I mean,
I mean,
we may want them to, but they don't.
in 2016, we had an intern count. There were 298 policy ideas on the Hillary Clinton's website. They went from Alzheimer's to Zika. And, it was Jake Sullivan. They're all like perfectly formulated. On Trump's site, there were 7 in his policy section. And one of them was respect the police, which of course is not a
It's
policy.
not a policy.
so,
That's a
yeah,
sentence, not a policy. Yeah.
it wasn't a thing. But so we need a vision of the future. And one other thing to the point you just made, our candidate needs to be unafraid. They cannot be walking through the minefield of expectations set by progressive groups about exactly how they will talk and exactly what they will say. They need to be able to go and sit with Joe Rogan for 3 hours and not worry about pissing somebody off at some advocacy group. And if they do, wear it as a badge of honor, because you just got to go out there and say what you mean. And I think, that is the lesson that some of these guys have learned. I mean, Gavin Newsom's trying that out
Yeah, he is.
slightly
Yep.
awkwardly, but he's doing it. We need somebody that's willing to do that.
I think it's so true. I mean, the thing I keep coming back to, it is amazing to me that people think Donald Trump is authentic. I mean, he lies all
I
the
know,
time.
I
I
know.
mean, I always say this, like, this is not a partisan statement. The guy lies all the time. 30,000 plus lies in the White House in this first term. But people think he's authentic. And
Yeah,
there is real appeal, though. I actually think when you think about, like, why is Bernie Sanders popular? It's because people think people that may not agree with him, but they think he actually believes what he says. Like, it's an
and he
interesting.
does.
Yes. It's
He
like you
totally
do
does.
need that. You do need that. And I think people did not, rightfully, candidly, in my assessment, people did not think that Kamala Harris was authentic because they didn't know what the hell she stood for.
I think that's exactly right, because she had, I think she hurt herself in 2019 much more than anything she did. I think she ran a very good race in 24, but
Yeah, there was the
she was,
damage done. I mean,
yeah,
from her and from Biden. I think that's right. All right, I'm gonna
right.
let you go, Matt. I've kept you way longer than I said I would. So thank you for taking time. For everyone who joined us live, thank you. I'm doing these. I'm trying to do them every week, every couple weeks. Out of the wilderness, talking to Democrats that I think are really smart, are thoughtful about all of this stuff, about where Democrats have been, where they are, and where they're going. Matt Bennett, the co-founder of Third Way. You can follow Third Way on Substack at Third Way. You can find it on the web. Lots of very interesting studies and papers that Third Way produces. Matt, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
See you.